Muito bom dia a todos.
Hello, good morning.
Muito bom dia a todos. Vamos começar o nosso terceiro.
We're now going to start the third day of the Estoril Political Forum conferences. I'd like to welcome you to this panel on Portugal, the challenges ahead. And I thank our guest speakers that I'm sure have busy agendas, but still made themselves available to be here this morning. I'd like to thank Professor Eduardo Marçal Grillo for giving us the honor of having him again with us. He will be the chair of this session. And I mean, I don't think I have to introduce Professor Marçal Grillo. Anyway, just to the few, maybe the foreigners that don't know him, Professor Marçal Grillo is a very relevant personality in Portugal and Europe in education matters. He's a former Minister for Education, and yes, he's also a trustee of the Gulbenkian Foundation, and until recently also in the University of Aveiro. So it's a great pleasure to have you with us again, Professor. And now I will give you the floor. Good day to all of you. I would like first to greet all participants in this session. A special word of thanks to João Carlos Espada, who was so kind to invite me again to this Estoril Political Forum. And congratulate you for another success of this initiative. And I tell the members of the panel that I am very privileged to be here with you in this debate. And finally, I want to a word of thanks to Dr. Sonia Ribeiro on my right. A debate among journalists is always very attractive. And so much so this one because we have with us four remarkable journalists that I like very much to read what they write. Sometimes I agree with them, sometimes I don't, but that's their virtue. I'm not going to introduce them. Well, I will introduce the four of them all together. We are before a panel whose members have some common characteristics. The first one is that they think with their own heads, with their own minds. That's good. The second is that they are great advocates of freedom. They don't have any enemies that I know about, well, at least not visible enemies. They are free thinkers. They express their opinions on many different subjects, and they have contributed to the education of their readers. They are great professionals. They write regularly in major papers, dailies and weeklies, and they are read mainly by the elites. Now, that is if we do have true elites in Portugal. I, for one, I read regularly what they write, and because I'm an independent, I'm a political but not a neutral person. Sometimes I agree with some of them, sometimes I agree with the others, or I disagree with them, but that's their virtue. We're now going to listen to them on the subjects that they want to speak about, because this is a very, maybe not broad, but vague challenges ahead. Well, that's rather ambiguous. Each one of them will approach this subject as he or she wishes, with pandemic, without pandemic, post-pandemic, the main structural changes, or the more specific issues at national level, European level, global level. Which ones? There's the fiscal system, labor laws, reform of the justice system, education system, science, political stability, inequalities, poverty, economic growth, demography, corruption, climate change, energy transition. Well, it's up to them to say what they want to say. So there will be no interferences, neither from Sonia. I suppose Sonia did not come here to interfere, and I certainly have not. So I will try now to give the floor to each one of them in the order that has been indicated, and which is first Diogo Agostinho, next Enrique Monteiro, then it should be José Pacheco Pereira, but he has not arrived yet, and then Manuel Carvalho and Teresa de Souza. So this is the order. Now, as far as times, 10 minutes each, so that we may also have some time for Q&A from the floor. So thank you again, and now I give the floor to Diogo. You may speak from wherever you want to. Good morning to you all. It is an honor to be here today on this side. Usually I'm on the other side. I'm an alumni of IEP. I've been here for professional reasons, so I can only thank the organizers for the invitation, and to thank Professor Marcel Grillo's kind words. He said 4 remarkable journalists. Well, I see 3 remarkable journalists. I'm not even a journalist yet. I am working for a newspaper, a new weekly called Novo. So it is an honor to us to be here side by side with the Espresso and Publico reference broadsheet newspapers in Portugal, and the fantastic work they have done during the democratic times in Portugal. Now, this is really a broad theme, and I'd also like to thank Professor Espada, and start by saying that our country has plenty of problems. We all feel that. I'm before future political sciences, future politicians, ministers, mayors, that I'm sure will come out of this forum. But I am before an IEP, which is one of the great examples of what our country should be like. But unfortunately, or shamefully, I don't hear a lot, I don't see a lot Professor Espada on television, Professor Rita Ciabrida, Professor Nuno Sampaio, Professor Pereira Coutinho. They don't appear as much on TV as they should. And these people should be there more often, because our political debate is unbalanced. We have many challenges. This is a vague subject. Well, the main subject now, the main target now is to approve the state budget. We are in a political crisis, or a sort of political crisis. We are waiting for this to be solved with the opposition parties also in internal debates for their succession, political succession. And another challenge, the recovery plan. The Prime Minister spent the local elections talking about the money that is going to come from Europe. Now we talk about money from Europe. What is Portugal today? What challenges does Portugal want to have in the future? We hear about the bridges, roads, a lot of investment, a lot of concrete, but nothing very profound about what country do we want to have. How can we make the most of those monies from Europe? Now, we know that we do need something from the start. We are not very many, 10 million people. I mean, Tokyo, Istanbul, São Paulo, these cities are larger than Portugal. Portugal is like a small town at global level. I don't see any important birth rate policy to change this dimension. And I don't think that's how we will change. Certainly not. We have to be honest with each other. We will not become 15 million in the next 20 years, for sure not. On the contrary, the population will tend to decrease. And then our geographic position. I don't think we are going to take over Spain, so we will remain where we are in our little corner. There has been a big debate some time ago about the fast-speed train to bring us closer to Europe. Now, when I was students today, they can take Ryanair, EasyJet, and they fly to Brussels or Paris at a very lower price. And I did not mention TAP, the Portuguese airliner. But there are other issues other things we can change. There are three main lacks. The first one, we are not productive. I'm an economist by training. I like to take a look at charts, tables that the Bank of Portugal publishes. I like very much the document by Professor Antonio Castro Silva, 118 pages. We learn a lot about the country, but then we think about it and say, we are not producing, this country is not producing. But allow me to include myself in your generation, the generation that will, on average, earn, but this is terrible to say, on average, we will earn less than our parents. This is a failure. This is to bring up children. I have two daughters, and I wonder what their future will be like. We are raising children to earn less than their parents, and moreover, the middle class is getting lower middle classes that's supporting the whole country. Local authorities recently in Portugal, the price of rents or the price of a real estate. How can a young person buy a house today in Lisbon with the help of his parents or his grandparents? That's the only way. This is the reality. We cannot escape it. Why? Because today a young man is rich if he earns 1,000 euros. Take a look at the state budget. Europe is going the opposite way. They take away, they are decreasing the number of levels in the revenue tax. In the Portugal, it's the other way around. 70,000, you're rich, so you 50% goes to the state. Things that get difficult. How many of you have heard that I got a raise at dinner? So someone says, beware of the rates, maybe that's not compensating, that's not rewarding. So this is another proof of a failure. So you get a pay raise, and it does not compensate. Now, all this is related to the deficit in productivity. We are poor. We also have a lack of culture, a cultural deficit. There are two characteristics, and I'm among those as well, so I'm not... I try to fight it, but it has always been like this. I have worked before for public entities. At Santa Casa da Misericordia of Lisbon, I worked there for 4 years, and I had people that had been there for 20, 30 years, and they look at me and say, look, I've always done this like this. And I asked, but can't you do it differently? No, that's the way I've always done it, and this is our culture. And our culture is like it's always been like this. We have always done it like this. We have also accepted like that, and so we just take it like that. And in addition to this, there is also this envy. This is a very Portuguese thing. Envy. He has a nice car. Either he stole it or is it his parents. It's keeping up with the Joneses. Now, this is natural. But we never wonder if our neighbor has a good car because he has a successful entrepreneur, or because he worked more, or because he was able to invest what he earned. And then take labor legislation, an example. There is a culture that they want to impose, and as in the past 6 years, equal work, equal pay. I've heard this before in social net media, in party claims. There is no equal work. Not even in a factory there is equal work. A professor is not an equal work. A journalist does not have equal work. Of course, there can not be major discrepancies, but where is the incentive to do more and better? Because there is a public servant, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, doing the same. He does 5 files, and another one at the same time, 100 files. Good if they does it good. What is the incentive for one to do 100 instead of 5? There is no incentive. Then there is a attack we feel on success, mainly on wealth. Today we live with a rather bizarre majority, not bizarre theory. We are celebrating the money from Europe by countries that or parties that hate Europe, and then we have this assault on wealth, this attack on wealth, and this is the worst about the future of France. We are attacking wealth, not poverty. Poor data. The statistics company says that there are about 2 million Portuguese living in poverty. No, we want to attack the rich that make 50,000 euros. That's our culture. So this brings us to this issue, the issue of leadership. Back to the local authorities, local elections, sorry. Carlos Moedas was recently elected mayor of Lisbon, and he promised in his campaign something called "I will bring a factory of unicorns to Lisbon." My WhatsApp was full of memes making fun of this statement. Why? Because there is no culture to explain to the people that the FITSI, far-fetched out systems are worth today much more than companies we are used to in our country. What do those companies have in common? They don't work with Portugal. They don't work for Portugal. Well, they still work in Portugal. They hire some engineers in Portugal. Our universities are resisting, but not the economy. Sergio Sousa Pinto, I cannot translate as he does definition of Portugal, but he speaks a lot about caste politicians. And we have to accept this. I mean, at the end of the day, what counts is your last name, the caste, the capacity of having or not having network. The middle class wants to have their children next to people with power, with capacity to have more, a better future and possibilities and more knowledge. Well, yes, it's pulling strings. In Portugal, we live off pulling strings. And the middle class just follows the wave. A while ago, Professor Marcelo Grillo said we were free thinkers. It wasn't easy to follow the wave, but this is such a big wave, overwhelming wave, that it's difficult to go against it. I don't know if my 10 minutes are over already, so I will just end in a few minutes. Professor Cavaco Silva, the former president, wrote a brilliant article on a newspaper, and he spoke about impoverishment and silencing. Now, he's always right, as he says. He never has doubts. I think, except for one of his articles, all of his articles were correct, except one where he mentioned Socrates, the former prime minister, was right. And this is a brilliant article. And your political science students, and I'm sure you have read it, and I would add to that the alienation. And that is this new weekly, where do we fit? We are a right-wing paper, and it is erratic to talk about this in Portugal. Well, it's already erratic for one to say is a right-wing person. And the newspaper, everyone says this is a newspaper of the fascists. But with all due respect for rigor, information treatment, for news, Portugal is alienated and biased because since I do not have João Carlos Paras on TV and no more Nuno Sampaio on TV, we try to follow our path. And our path is to say there are different viewpoints. There is in the country, there are good entrepreneurs. There are people with success that create they want what they want. They want a state that does not get on the way in the way. Well, this culture of father state is also embedded in certain entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are always asking for all types of subventions and subsidies, and they are happy with a 2 cents reduction in the price of gas. But that's culture that we have to beat, because this culture is bad for us all. All of us who want to have a future in this country. Thank you.
Oops. Good morning. Good morning to you all. First of all, I would like to explain something. I came here many times, and people spoke English, and I've been writing everything in English. GDP, average de PIB. So I've got my notes in English. So I'm going to do something very difficult for me to read in Portuguese. Some notes that I have written in English. So it's really a challenge. First of all, I would like to say that it's an honor for me to be here. I would like to greet Sonia Ribeiro and my dear friend, my Professor Eduardo Massal Grillo, with whom I was here last week. Might become a habit meeting, and also greet all my colleagues of the panels, some that I've known for many years, like Teresa de Souza, also Diogo Agostinho, and Manuel Carvalho here, who is here in the middle. He's got an intermediate position. I would like also to greet the EP and his director. I've known his director for almost half a century. Hope to have another half century to know him better and to exchange ideas. And we've had a strange relationship. He was an Oxford student when I was studying in the United States. We met in Portugal and we could share the same ideas. Well, this really cemented our friendship. So I've been asked to talk about the challenges and the issues that Portugal has to address. And I'm going to tell you first that Portugal has to address so many issues that it's really difficult to name them all. In the Diogo Agostinho said those expressed some indecision, didn't know which challenge he had to mention first. And sometimes we choose one of these challenges and we discover that there are many, many other issues which have to be addressed. So, in fact, there's so many issues that they prevent us to reach the challenge that we have chosen. I would dare to say that the weight of the state and the government, the administration, which forces people to carry a rather heavy burden, also the weight of the state and the administration is such that we cannot really pay it. And this is why we have an enormous, enormous debt. And might be our biggest problem to have services of the state, public service that we can pay for. Well, if I owed money to someone, my main problem would be to be able to reimburse this debt. Maybe because I'm too honest, too scrupulous. But anyway, should, in fact, the primary expenditure has grown in such a way recently during the years of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, it also increased. In fact, the total of the salaries of the public administration, the pensions which are paid by the state, are so high that the rest is very little. What remains is very little to be applied in the essential roles of the state and to be applied in urgent reforms which would reduce this weight and this extension of the state. And to manage this, we should have to start with the foundations. We have CEDES, which is the most ancient think tank of Portugal. It has illustrious figures like Professor Marcel Grilo, or the President of the Republic, or the Secretary General of the United Nations, and other eminent personalities. In fact, we thought that the electoral system was one of our pillars. It combined a national circle or circumscription with the other nominal electoral circles, which enable us to give more role in the electors when we have parliamentary election, and they help us for the reform of the territory. In the past, among all countries, Portugal is the one which has less decentralized and has allotted less money to local governments. Now, this model might give more credibility to the government and administration and allow the scrutiny of the members of parliament, something which does not exist, maybe in a very primitive way. Portugal has become from a full democracy to the status of electoral democracy, not only because of the fragility of the media, but also because of the scrutiny of the authorities. A minister has become governor of the Bank of Portugal. I don't think it's very correct. Another one, MP, went to the authority of the transports. As you know, to implement such reforms, there must be political will in the parliament. Now, as long as the parliament will remain as a kind of stage where two blocks fight with each other, I'm talking about blocks and not parties, because each one of these blocks tend to be prisoners of extremist forces. As long as the parliament will be such a stage, we won't manage to pass any reforms in the parliament, because it will be always vetoed by the other side. The electoral reforms only requires majority, but all the other reforms need the collaboration at the center, support at the center. And I think that the fight for the defense of the political center, which involves many things, defending our oldest alliance with the United Kingdom and standing for our transatlantic vocation, and also defending with a critical view our history our history, which was discoveries and without any shame. We had also slavery and slave trading. Happily enough, all this is over. But I will say the peculiarity of our way of life, and this is described by Thucydides in the history of the War of the Peloponnesus. In fact, the nature of our way of life, not to have created colonialism, slavery, to have reached the conclusion that this was not ethical, that it was not correct. And it was the Western countries which ended with the death penalty, with the slavery, with the traffic of slaves. And now we say that this is the fault of the white man, which is really extraordinary to say that. So this defense of the political center, which involves more participation from the populations in the European decisions, and there's also a fight against the political correct and critical theory, which has can be translated in Portuguese as theory critic or cancel culture, maybe cultura do cancelamento. Maybe anyway, this combat to obtain a totally liberal um, comprehension, understanding of the world from the left to the center right is our more important fight. And this is this combat which will free us from the weight that the state still exercises on us, that the lack of the existence of private, of robust private enterprises, because the money sold by Europe won't be of any use if it's not used in productive institution. The Volkswagen unit in Palmela accounts for 2% of our GDP. We would need more of 2 units of that term. We need to double our GDP until 2040. This is one of the objectives of CEDES. It might seem impossible. Many countries which have overturned us have doubled their GDP in 2 years. Even Romania is ahead of us. We need to reindustrialize ourselves. And this is not by disputing the objectives of the climate, but I'm going to say which is not politically correct. I think that this energy crisis is already warning us that the climate objectives might be a way of creating more poverty. So our great fragility, the deficit, our great weak point needs a long agreement with the central parties, combating extremism and defending the center, which is essential to win this battle. And I hope that this battle will be won. Thank you. Good morning to you all. Oh, I can breathe much better without a mask. What a relief. Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you. I would like to thank the Institute of Political Studies in the person of Professor Spada. I'd like to thank Sonia Ribeiro, Professor Grillo, and my partners of the panel. So this vast topic that we have been discussing for about a century, we'll have to continue discussing it, because when there will be a single objective answer as a political society, we shall be all dead. So it's good to discuss it because it's a sign we're still alive. That there are a lot of issues which, in my opinion, are structurally important so that we can have an idea about our future. It is the problem. There's the problem of our elite, which and there is very serious asymmetries. We have a very heavy heritage. We have problems in the educational system. We have enterprises with a deficit in their management. But my reflections are not going to deal with it, with these problems, but I'm going to talk about another topic, and I'm going to focus on the reform of the state. I agree with the diagnosis of Enrique, but I'm going to challenge you with an issue on which I have been writing and reflecting for many years, which is a critical issue within that critical problem, which is the inefficiency of our state, the labyrinth that is our state, and everything the negative that it implies for the state and the Portuguese economy. When talking about the reform of the state, I'm going to subscribe the old thesis of Professor Cravigno when he says that there cannot be any reform of the state when there is not some regionalization, something which stands in our constitution. This is rather, maybe we could call it something else, but something which is consensual, creation of intermediate structures between the states and local government, which would be elected by the population. So we could surf in a kind of mayonnaise for many decades if we don't have the courage to look at our state, to break its spine in the center and shift some areas of competence to the regions, to the territory. Otherwise, we'll be simply wasting time. We have to understand that this is the issue of regionalization is in the Constitution of 1976. Why have we not been able to implement it until now? Not going to talk about a thesis on more bureaucratic or administrative questions, but I'm going to focus my discussion on a point which is essentially political. Why is it political? Because one of the reasons which have been hampering this debate and its implementation is the liberal paradox. We must have the only class of liberals in the world which is against this transfer of the power of the center to the periphery. I don't know any other which has this stand, or any liberal theory says that anything which can be decided by the population should not be decided by the center. And we all, since the party which stands for the liberal ideas says, oh, stop. All that is liberal, one of the fundamental principles of liberalism, which is subsidiarity, cannot be touched. It reminds me the thesis of the colonialists who used to say that there cannot be any democracy in Africa. I remember that. These are two lectures of the problem which are really slanted. Today's in Portugal, The first reading is that it would be in the advantage of the regional bosses. So these people who are always to have central bosses is not a problem, but to have regional bosses, it's not a problem. Well, but the other reflection says, well, we are a very small country. On the European scale, we're not a small country, we are an average country. On the European scale, what we can see that all modern states have different bodies, all have intermediary bodies of the administration, excepting Greece. All have it. In Denmark, for instance, they are always discussing the model of attribution of function, competences, and resources to intermediate bodies of the region. But we still have a kind of medieval state. This is the output of the dominance of the central power to dominate the territory. That was fine in the past, and this is why Portugal achieved its unity. But it's no longer possible to govern a country in the digital era with a big head centralized in Lisbon, which has the pretension to be efficient and fair, to decide if the road, whether the road connecting two small towns in the north should go this way or the other. This is inefficiency. It's like it's it is an encouragement to corruption. But this kind of procedure to have such a big head which rule the whole territory, it can only be done, gives results into a kind of labyrinth. Today will be presented a book with the presence of the President of the Republic, and one of them concludes that a state which is too centralized is a factor of corruption. This is an evidence. If we look at all autocracies since Soviet Union, we see that there's a lot of corruption in centralized states. It's more likely to happen than in a decentralized state. Apart from these other inefficiencies, which explain the lack of exit in the application of the EU funds. I am from the north, from Oporto. I remember what was Galicia before receiving the EU funds. I know that they have differences in, but the discussion, the allocation of resources from the different EU funds, from coming from decision, debate, involving local enterprises and local entrepreneurs, defining policies at the level of the region, namely the application of the funds in the north of Portugal. There's no comparison. This is why Portugal and the north of Galicia had a higher GDP per capita, but it is an indicator of what is, and we should reflect on. And there is another issue which is fundamental. It has to do with democracy. There's a lot of decisions that are proposed in the intermediate echelons of the central administration, which have to be validated by the ministers. And in these cases, there are not any intervention from the citizens. They have no voice in the process. It should be possible to penalize or to pay tribute to the authors of these reforms. There is a thesis which goes like that. Look at the quagmire of our local governments. There's a lot of corruption locally there's a lack of democracy at local level, especially in the small regions, villages and towns. This type of corruption, opacity, a lack of transparency, is a cause also of corruption, but it happens in the central administration with a difference. The efficiency, the reproductivity of public investment in the local government is far greater than in the central administration. The facility that the local government got rid of the indebtedness during the euro crisis is a fact. It's easy to verify for a very simple reason, and we'll come back to the central issue. It's impossible to govern the country in the digital era with a big head, central head, which thinks that it can decide everything which must be decided in its different components. So, like this, we won't have a more liberal and more practical society, and the asymmetries will be more accentuated. Thank you very much.
Bom dia.
Thank you to all of you. I hate the politically correct, so I said to all of you, men and women, but that's my problem. I don't have to say to all of you, men and women, just say to all of you. Now, two disclaimers, if you allow me. The first is that for health reasons, I have speech issue, and another one is for another health problem. I can't say very well. To not be a good speaker, neither a good seer, does not put me in the best position in this panel. But nevertheless, and despite this health issues, I wanted to be here, and I hope you can understand me, and I hope so. Now, let me start by saying that I already guessed before arriving in here that I would be basically in agreement with what my friends and my good my dear director said before me. Now I'm the last one to speak. I practically, not fully, but almost fully, I subscribe to Enrique's presentation, and I also agree with Manuel Carvalho's presentation, even though I am from Lisbon, he's from Porto, and therefore we may sometimes clash about the centralizing vision of the country, but I do agree with what is said. And because of my profession, I know what happens in Europe. I don't think there is a country so centralized as Portugal, and that's certainly a problem. Now, I knew I would agree with you, with the other members of the panel, so I decided to go a different way. So let me start by reminding you that, and I'll get to the EIP, but let me first remind you of an anecdote of the famous writer, a Spanish writer, Unamuno. He said that once he was on a road, he found a Portuguese man sitting on a stone crying. He approached the man, the Portuguese, and asked, "My friend, why are you crying?" And the Portuguese answered, "I don't know. I just cry because there must be a reason for me to cry." And I think that is a good portrait of a reasonable portrait of Portugal. We always have a reason to cry, and that takes us space and time to think, to decide, to do. But well, it's a general problem. But let's not go that way now. Let me add that the same happened to me as to Enrique. I thought I was going to be speaking in English. I know, and I am a good friend of the director of IEP, Professor Espada. So I thought I had to speak in English. I prepared my paper in English. And just like Enrique, not to make any mistakes. And now, just like Enrique, I will translate it into Portuguese as I speak. Of course, that's my mother tongue. Having said this, I'm not going to talk about the challenges ahead. As I said, Enrique and Manuel already did that, and they were very clarifying. Let me just talk about a little bit about, and as a journalist, about what brought us here precisely so that we don't fall in Unamuno's story that I started this presentation with. Enrique said it already. Our favorite sport in Portugal is to compare ourselves with Eastern and Central European countries that acceded the European Union in 2004, and to say even those countries are overtaking us. Now, if you look into the papers or television, there's always someone saying this terrible fate of ours. Now, let me add something to this thing that maybe makes it more understandable, and so that we feel more like doing what has to be done within Europe and the transatlantic relationship. This comparison is unfair to begin with. And why is it unfair? Because, let me just give you an example. Before the Second World War, Czech Republic, at the time called Czechoslovakia, was as rich as France, and with a very rich economic and cultural activity. Then they were subjected to a totalitarian regime for 40 years, which led to a drawback of a lot of those added values until the Russians left. But there was a chapter in which they kept, for instance, regarding Southern European countries, a certain advantage, and that chapter was, of course, education for all, and with quality levels, if we take away the ideological thing, quite reasonable. Now, as we when in the turn of the century, 19th century to 20th century, the turn of the century, the whole population of Sweden, a country that I, for one, admire a lot. So, as I was saying, Sweden was literate. They could read and write to be considered literate, and more or less the same some years later in England. When we had the revolution in 1974, 36% of adults in Portugal were illiterate. So we like to say that, it's not just comparing ourselves to the Eastern European countries, but we like to say that, well, we cannot use the excuse of the fascism for 50 years because we already have almost 40 years of democracy. Okay, I take it. we had time to do a lot, and we did do a lot. We did a lot. You are young. A lot of you do not remember what Portugal was like before 74. Now, I'm an old woman. I know what it was like. And believe me, this country you live in today compared to where we lived in 74 is totally different. I mean, we have advanced in all areas a lot. And in an area like education, this accumulation of decades and decades of dictatorship, where education was not a priority. Worse than that, the people did not have, they thought the people did not have to be educated. All they had to do was to obey and work. That was the motto of the dictator that we had for 50 years, almost 50 years. So despite an effort, a huge effort was made, and it's one of our greatest accomplishments in democracy in terms of education. In the Portuguese universities, such as Católica University, for instance, and others, they appear now in the rankings of the best universities in the world, which is remarkable. Today, a lot of the younger population already, well, not all, but a lot of them are able to graduate from high school. But compared to the average of the more developed European countries, we are still lagging behind, and this is also an explanation to a lot of our difficulties. Another reason to our difficulties in the past 20 years and the standstill of the economy as a name. I'm going to pronounce this name, and I hope that you will not misinterpret me. The name is the euro. The euro was, I for one was an advocate, a great champion of our accession to the single currency in 1999 for economic reasons, but mainly for political reasons. Portugal, since 74, had the main concern was to fight its peripheral location, trying to become closer to the center of the European decision-making. And it would be unthinkable in strategic terms for Spain to exceed the Eurozone and Portugal be left out. That would be terrible. But the fact is that the euro, as it works, has worked so far, I hope it may change someday, but the euro is a currency made for the rich countries of the European Union, namely the one that benefits the most, Germany, and also the Netherlands and other Central European countries. And it is it was a very strong currency for the Portuguese economy. Now, Portuguese reformers say that if we had done the reforms, no, that's you don't make reforms like this, easy as that. Just snap your fingers, and then we'll all be like Germany. No. There are conditions, the baseline conditions have to be overcome. So the euro, although a good idea, it has contributed to our stagnation. There are other problems. Manuel and Enrique spoke a lot about centralization. It's terrible. That's a terrible problem, the weight of the state. But we have to think about the weight of state in a dual perspective. The weight of the state is also a result other than centralizing tradition, the mistakes made by the main political parties in relation to the machine of the state and how it functions. But we have a happy state because in 74, when we came to 74, we did not have a welfare state, unlike the European Union countries. We had to build a welfare state from scratch. We had to create a safety net for all the population, something we did not have at the time. So making it building it on the base of equity. So we had to create National Health Service, public schools. This was done from scratch, and this effort that came with democracy that led to this weight in the state. So it was not just some crazy guys that decided to value the state, and I'm going to close. It is also the result of our normal lives in the 20th century and of what we had to overcome and to make up for. Now, Professor Marcel Grill, who I respect so much since my 15 years old, I'm even older than you, Enrique, he's telling me to shut up, so I will shut up. But let me just say that we also have some things that we can explore in the future, which is the other side. Our geography is a handicap because we are far away from the rich markets in the European Union, but it's also a blessing if we look at it with attention. We are a country turned towards the Atlantic. We have a role that we can play to contradict the over-continentalization of the European Union because of the Brexit. We feel well only in a Europe which is based on a transatlantic relationship. We have the ocean, as we always had, to sustain these objectives. So we also have our perspectives, our history, our future that can be a key contribution for the Europe of the future, and at the same time improving our own stance in Europe and the global level. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Nós temos algum tempo.
Thank you. We have a few minutes for debate, please.
Por atrás do professor Espada. Já está.
Bom dia.
Morning. Thank you to the members of the panel. I am Madalena. I'm a second-year student at IEP. And a question about something that Diogo Agostinho mentioned. I think it's one of the major challenges of Portugal in the future. Europe is going through a demographic winter. The latest census say that the birth rate is decreasing. Generation renewal rates are below the levels that we should have to ensure the survival of our population, and it will be a burden for the pensions, and it also has an effect on migration policies. Now, I'm the older of 10 siblings, quite rare these days in Portugal. So I know what it is like living in with a numerous, big family without aid from the state. So my question is, to what extent this birth policy has an influence on the culture in society, and what can we do? over there on the left. Good morning, I'm Christian. I'm a student first year in IEP. A question to Mr. Enrique Monteiro. You mentioned Romania a while ago. I'm a Romanian myself. I've been living in Portugal for 11 years. I am amazed to see Romania overtaking Portugal on several parameters. Portugal ended the dictatorship in 74, now in 79, in 89. Portugal has been a member of the EC for longer than me. So my question is, what am I doing here? And what could Portugal do to make me stay? Because, as a matter of fact, if I and other thousands of young people decide to leave, Portugal will lose a lot. Hello, thank you. My name is Clara, second-year student at EP. My question is to Diogo. When you talk about being from a right-wing newspaper and how erratic that can be, so what would be the advantages of Portugal of a newspaper that is positioned like that? And how could that help the Portuguese press, namely in relation to rigorous news and to uphold the truth? That's my question. Can you elaborate on that? Sorry, we don't have time for more questions, so I will have to give the floor to the members of the panel. Diogo, do you want to answer right away? Thank you. Marilena. 10? You have 10 or 9 brothers and sisters? Fantastic. Well, there are no birth policies in Portugal. We heard here a lot about the social value, education. Well, natality or birth rate is always a little aid, a little allowance, more or less. There should be, because we are few, but we produce less. So 10 million people with 10 million poor, 2 million poor. Those companies, they cannot prosper here. So should birth rate be a priority? Yes, of course. Now, to add birth rate, you spoke about school, education, the so-called social elevator, or social lift. Now, I'm looking at your family. 10 children going to private schools? Impossible, I suppose. So public school has to work. And Minister of Education, well, the current Minister of Education says that each student costs 6,000 euros to the state. Now, a parent then thinks, but there are private schools that cost less than that. So there is a lot that can be changed. The education check is a sacrilege. Why should a parent with 10 children, and the main overhead is certainly paying for their children's education, why shouldn't he have the freedom to choose the best schools, even private or schools, if the cost is 6,000 euros? Now, to end, and in answer now to Clara. Clara, thank you for your question. We want to balance the country, because right now it is we are living in an imbalanced situation. We don't want to overcome. We don't want to replace the parts, but we want to communicate our ideology with rigor and ethics by stating ourselves as a right-wing paper. We have to be even more rigorous, because otherwise they will say that we are not following the truth. I'm being told to shut up, so I have to stay here. Okay, so very briefly, demographic winter, how can we fight that? I have 3 daughters. I don't think people these days, they no longer have so many children because of lack of conditions, and either here in United Kingdom or in France, it's not a matter of conditions. I sound like a priest. It's hedonism, selfishness, the will to put their work life and money ahead of family. That's a cultural problem. That's why we are decadent. Don't call me a priest. I'm not even a Catholic. But the question is, that's the question. People don't have children because they don't want to. All fight for increasing birth rate is welcome, but it's a lost fight. It's a lost struggle. You say that there are no birth rate policies? Yes, but they are marginal. Even China, that did it the other way around, the single-child policy, they have to abandon that policy because there are things that the state cannot get into. How many children will I have with my wife? Let me have as many as I want to. So that's the first thing. How can we fight this? Immigration. Immigration with an I. I think that immigration should be subject, well, there is a lot of discussion. It should be open and subject to only 2 or 3 questions. The first is who arrives will have to be integrated in our way of living, in our laws, in our way of doing things. No one visits someone else, even if you are a good friend, and put your feet on the table, even if you do it at home. So the rules of the other are the homes are his rules, and those are the rules that have to be followed. And so apart from that, immigrants are welcome. Now, our Romanian friend said, "What is he doing if Romania is overtaking Portugal?" Let me say this: well, we do have the sun. Romania also has. I know those beaches are no good compared to ours. And I've been there. But you're very welcome here, and people like you, with capacities, with skills, technical, intellectual skills, these people are always very welcome in Portugal. Romania is overtaken. What should Portugal do not to be overtaken? Well, I mean, all Romanians also have a right to live, but not to lag so much behind. And I don't agree with Teresa when she said Czech Republic. It's not because they have a good education system, because the hospitals in Poland was very good, because actually that was all cheated those hospitals in Poland. I remember some journalists telling me, and others like John Paul Scrum, that once she had a fall in Warsaw, and she was put in a bed in an hospital in Warsaw with other 2 people. Now, if the National Health Service ever did that, I mean, all doctors will resign. So that's not the question. What Czech Republic has, well, they are close to Germany, and they became like a subsidiary to Germany, and the Czechs are very happy with that. Now, other countries did similar things, but there is one thing they did not do. They did not make the mistakes of they were always growing, and having social systems that today are unsustainable. That's so. Just one comment about right-wing papers. I don't think that people are afraid of saying they are of the right. I think that's it's like fashionable because no one wants to be of the right. Well, yes, of course, people can be of the right, but you cannot talking about social issues and defending social aids or support with not being of the right, because that's leaving the social issues to the right, to the left, and that's what the right is doing, and I think they are wrong about that.
Posso só dizer uma coisa?
Just one thing. No one asked me anything, but Ricky adulterated my words. Well, that's a journalist's speciality. Yes, let me just say, I did not speak about health. As a matter of fact, I visit the Democratic Republic of Germany and I visited in many places just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. What I saw in social terms was a horror movie, and life in those countries was a nightmare. Actually, we both went to Rostov and other horrible places. So I am not saying that they had anything good. I'm just saying, and I insist, that the Czech Republic had the wealth of France in 1938, before the Anschluss, before Bohemia was annexed by Hitler, and the education system in the Czech Republic did not produce 36% of population being illiterate. And I insist, that's what I'm saying. So they had education. That was 47 years ago. We also had the wealth of Sweden in the beginning of the 20th century. Well, I just wanted to clarify this. Enrique has his ideas, I have mine. We are both liberals, but he is a conservative and I am a social democrat. That's the difference.
Bom, tudo bem. Estou com a Teresa, não fizeram nenhuma pergunta, mas esta conversa é tão interessante que eu...
This chat is so interesting that I would like also to say something when you're obvious that a country which reaches 1994 with 90% of its population completely schooled has an advantage with the country compared to Portugal. In the case of the Czechoslovakia, the industrial tradition of the 30s in the Czech Republic, it was the seventh more industrialized country in the world. It had colossus like Skoda, it had war industries. It could not be compared. What about Latvia? What about Slovenia? Well, I'll get to that. Just wait a minute. The comparison with the Czech Republic does not make much sense. But my dear Enrique, you could compare it with the Baltic republics, with Bulgaria, with Romania, in the case that these countries were never great industrial countries. They had the heavy industries which had to be completely reconstructed. It was at an enormous cost. But what is in effect that these countries adapted themselves. They understood what were the rules of the single European market. They invested. They stopped the arguing about redistribution. And this accounts for the success of the Baltic countries. And it also explains our relative success. I think that we continue to be anchored in a certain vision. Well, Teresa, I'm not a conservative like Enrique. Don't put me in that group. What we have to answer is that either we are conformists or anti-conformists. Do we believe it or not? Can we do better or not with the quality of our universities, of our young people, for a lot of our enterprise, with all the favorable winds that come from Europe? Can we do better or not? This is the question we have to put, and I think that we can do better.
Manel, ficaste liberal centrista.
Have become a centrist liberal. Just 1 second, please. What? Microphone, please. The micro. We have to decide and not to have the role of the optimist who thinks that everything is going well. Just give you an example. My father, who died more than 20 years ago, was part before the 25th of April of the first commission to study the new airport in Lisbon. I remember that. I was small, but I knew it. So it says a lot about some of our problems. We still don't know what to do. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Vamos ter.
So now we have to end. Just allow me to say two things very quickly. First is that with age, become more and more skeptical. I get always a bit suspicious with people who have a lot of certainties. I think that I'm always suspicious because it means that these people didn't think much about the issue, or they are too focused on an objective. Secondly, very difficult to coordinate such a debate between journalists, because each one has its own idea, and you can draw your own conclusions. There are no conclusions from this debate, but there are two which seems essential to me. What really is important is the ethical principle, solidarity, to respect the other, the truth, and honesty. And this is what is lacking very so often. The secondly is that there is so much to do. We have to be demanding with the others, and we have to be demanding with ourselves, because we can always do better. And you who are young could all be my grandchildren. Would be too much. It would be a bit too much. I encourage you to that. You should always have doubts. You should always question yourselves. You should have a scientific mind. Don't have certainties. When you have certainties, you have to maintain the doubt until the following day. The scientists, when they reach a conclusion on the next day, they wonder if this certainty is true. To have a scientific culture is essential to make some progress. Thank you very much.